This time on Poll Hub, crime is certainly on the minds of the media, and polls indicate it's on the minds of Americans as well. But how much of the increasing worry about crime is based on reality, especially in light of the horrific terror attack on the New York City subway this week? We've got a lot to talk about. Then, baseball's back, but how much will the delayed start, due to the labor dispute between billionaire owners and millionaire players, impact the game this year and into the future? Finally, we've left the best for last, and you'll have to stick around to the end to find out why that is a terrible dad joke. So let's get to it. And hi, everybody. Welcome to Poll Hub. I'm J.D. Dapper.
And I'm Barbara Carvalho.
And I'm Lee Maringoff.
We started this week with a plan for the podcast, and it shifted a lot after what happened in New York, in Brooklyn, on the subway, a terror attack. And a lot has changed since we started playing this podcast. There's been an arrest made, but it really highlights this issue of crime rising as a concern for voters. And we wanted to talk about that in light of a couple of things. One, the reality of crime rates rising in some places, not rising so much in others. But then also the reality that the perception that people have is often based on what they're seeing on the news or what they're hearing from people that they're talking about. And the fact is that Americans are increasingly worried about crime. So how do we separate this from when the statistics say one thing and people are thinking about something different in a different way? How do we kind of work through that when we're talking about public opinion?
Well, what's interesting, I think, as we've discussed on other issues, is that perception can really end up reality. And what we do measure in public opinion is people's perceptions. We've been discussing the economy the last couple of weeks. And although there are a good amount of very positive economic indicators that have been very strong, in fact, people who had been investing in the stock market are pretty upset this April 15th because they're actually going to be paying more taxes because of the income that they've received. But for the rest of us, there's a sense, there's a greater emphasis on inflation. So I think we see a similar, pattern when it comes to crime as well. I know that just speaking historically, that crime, the perception of crime and its intensity tends to rise as we approach the summer months and through the summer months, because there tends to be more visible crime during the season, particularly in areas that have a winter. But I think in this instance, it's also about the stories that the media is covering. And if you do look at who is concerned about crime, majorities of women, Republican-leaning independents, and those 30 and older tend to worry a great deal about crime. Overall, since 2016, actually since the first time since 2016, a majority of Americans, 53%, say they personally worry a great deal about crime right now, and that's according to a Gallup poll. Another 27% report that they worry a fair amount. Men, Democrats and Democratic-leaning independents, and those who are younger are less concerned. And what I find really interesting about that is you mentioned there's definitely a geographic difference to this. There has been increases in crime over the couple of COVID years in cities. So I think it's actually interesting to be talking about the fact that Democrats, people who are younger, are not as concerned, given that those are the people who are generally living in those urban areas, and places that have, seen a lot of crime those are, some of the, more red states. We've taken a look at the 10 highest homicide, the 10 states with the highest homicide rates in the U.S. And the first 6 of them are all red states. You skip 2, which are blue states, not ones that you would think of, New Mexico and Georgia, and then you go back to some red states. So there is definitely a difference between perception and reality.
Yeah, I was just going to jump right in on that. There is the perception that among red state voters or just more Republican backers, regardless of where they live, that somehow rising crime is always associated with liberal, progressive policies and judges who constantly are just turning people out on the streets. And that there's people aren't spending enough time in prison for their crime, and yet, as you just pointed out, 8 of the top 10 states with the increase are in red states, where Donald Trump carried. So again, the point being the perception and reality, and I think this is a little bit of a shell game going on here, as we see in so much of our politics, as to what's the cause and what's the actual reality of what's leading some of these concerns. And I myself am also concerned at this point with what the post-pandemic country will look like. And I think we may be seeing some of that now as people are, have returned somewhat to some semblance of normal in their lives. And there was just a lot of people kind of, pent up in physical space in their apartments and their houses and what have you, and that may have led also to pent up frustrations. And now we're coming into the summer, and that, as you indicated, Barb, sometimes becomes a likelihood of increasing crime. And I think we're having shootings daily in this country. Some seem to punch through and get a lot of the media attention. Others don't, but the realities are that this has become a common occurrence in America, and one that I don't think we're even beginning to discuss, despite the public opinion polls who uniformly want, the public wants greater restrictions on guns. And that does not seem to be part of what enters into the political dialogue.
So whether fair or not, crime is a political issue in this election year. It's midterm election year. And so the White House has jumped in. They can read the polls as well as anybody. There was an event this week. The White House, the administration took administrative action on ghost guns, which is one part of the issue, one part of the problem. It's clearly, as you mentioned, Lee, it's how Democrats define the problem. Republicans define the problem in another way. But I wonder, how much could this be an issue in the midterms in 2022? We look at the economy, we look at inflation, we look at the war in Ukraine, and we look at crime. How much of this is an issue? They're talking about California being a bellwether this year, because there's elections earlier, and perhaps that could be a bellwether whether rising crime there, spells a political issue that Republicans can capitalize on. What do you think?
I think things are moving so quickly that as you just mentioned, you've 4 or 5 of the issues that are going to be foremost on people's minds in October, and we don't have room for that. So I think crime is a lasting issue. I think the economy always is important. One would hope that COVID is taking a back seat by then, and the international situation in Ukraine really isn't driving the discussion in terms of people's midterm choices at this point, anyway. So, assuming we don't send ground troops in, which I think is probably a good assumption, I think we're talking about crime being probably up there with the economy as being 1, 2. You pick your order, and the ghost guns obviously are, for those who want to see greater restrictions, tackles one issue. But until you get to the automatic AK-47 or whatever, you're not going to get there.
Well, also, I think one thing about the issue of crime, if I might just add to kind of wrap this up, is that crime also feeds some of the culture clash issues. And so to the degree that it becomes entwined with those other issues, I think we can see it coming to the fore for the midterm.
And now switching gears, as promised, a discussion of my favorite topic, not necessarily this part of the topic, but baseball. And the season is back in full swing after a brief delay.
You'll take any excuse to talk about baseball, Lee.
Yes, I happily. And I think that, I think people are actually more interested in the season now because anything that sounds something normal is getting getting people excited. Even when hope springs eternal, and at this time of baseball season, I think even more so this year, that the interest seems to be higher than we might expect. But clearly, we came out of a very serious potential conflict, which ended up controversy between labor and management, between the owners and the ball players, as far as the new contract is concerned, and a lot of changes in the rules and regulations of baseball. And the polls pretty much indicated, without exception, I should say, that when it comes to the fans and whether they side with the players or the owners, as Jay said at the top, they tend to side more with the millionaire players than the billionaire owners. And so that we see that depending on different questions, by 2-1, I would say. Morning Consult poll found, the LA Times poll. I mean, we're seeing that the blame is being laid at the doorstep of these very well-to-do owners, and I don't.
But does these kinds of debates and negotiations, does it overall just hurt the sport when, as Jay put it, the billionaires are negotiating with the millionaires, and some of us can't even fathom the level of contracts that are being negotiated. Does it hurt the sport overall?
I think it does, and I think that probably more so because the price of tickets keeps zooming up, and there's a sense on the part of fans that there must be a lot of money being made all around, because, as I say, when Giancarlo Stanton of the Yankees strikes out, I could have made that $20,000 for that strikeout. I could have done that. Probably an exaggeration of what the abilities are, or distortion, but the point being that there's a lot of money around this sport, and it's doing well, and people do get hostile because there seems to be a lot, and the ticket prices at what used to be an easy family event, to go, couple, the parents, couple kids go to the stadium, start putting that into your calculator, and you get way past $100 really fast. And if you want to put a hot dog or a soda onto that, you're probably really running up a tab.
I think the parking is $100 in a lot of places. Anyway,
well, we're talking New York here, guys. There are actually places in this country where you can watch baseball for a much more reasonable amount.
And you actually can get seats near the playing field too for a reasonable amount, not the empty seats we see at Yankee Stadium, which are season ticket holders.
So there is a new AP NORC poll that came out just last week, and they asked baseball fans, "What does this spoil the season for you?" 28% of baseball fans say they're at least somewhat angry. That's the word they use to describe the upcoming season. 39% at least somewhat frustrated. I mean, the top answer was interested, which is good. Like extremely or somewhat interested was 86%, but still, I mean, that strikes me more than a quarter are angry. That does seem. I do wonder though. That seems high, and it's fresh off of this, dispute being solved. But you get to the All-Star break. Does anybody remember this? Because we've had strikes in the past. We had seasons destroyed by strikes in the past.
Sure, and coming off of COVID, I mean, I think the owners understood, and probably the players as well, that a long-term strike right now, over greed on either side, was not going to be met well, given that people sort of really want things to look normal. And so the only thing I think was a 1 week delay and that will not have a lasting impact. But baseball has bigger problems to solve, and I don't think the rule changes are addressing those. It has to do with the decade-long battle of the length of the game and just how interesting it is to people, given that basketball and football is certainly, with the exception of the playoffs in the World Series, I mean, baseball has nothing like the Super Bowl and nothing like March Madness or any of the championship series that go on elsewhere. It just hasn't stuck as the national pastime, and that is not being addressed by any of these kinds of tinkering over the designated hitter rule and whether you start the extra innings with a ghost player on second base or not. I mean, that's not really what. If you really wanted to be instructive about this, go back and look at the time it took for games to be played 40, 50 years ago. Like 60 years ago, 70 years ago, Don Larson's perfect game in 1956.
60, 70. I think you said 6 or 7.
Yeah, well, it's hard. I take my birthday and I subtract.
So I think you made, I think you meant 60 or 70.
Yeah, and that too. And
and how about those double headers back in 1919, Lee? Those were great.
I used to go to doubleheaders, and it wasn't 1919, but Don Larson, the perfect game, you're talking 2 hours. Most games were under 2 hours. And now the only thing you get now is if it rained out, would rival that. But anyway, so baseball's got a lot on its plate. And fortunately, one of them isn't right now that they're sitting on the sidelines negotiating a contract to the detriment of the sport in the long run.
Yeah, only 27% of Americans say that they're currently fans of Major League Baseball. I think they have, a tough road, especially as ticket prices continue to increase, and also the ability to watch games. As we're streaming and as we're, have all of these different packages, are getting much more expensive to even follow the team that you want to follow. So
yeah, and to find where they are that night, because there's so many different places. But anyway, to be continued, I'm sure, in future episodes of Polo.
So the only thing we have left is Lee's, and highlight on the left is Lee's fun fact. And it's actually titled by our producers as Lucky Lefties. So I'm taking a turn at this today, and we have
Barb, I would say you're pinch hitting for me. That's where I would go with that.
Okay.
She batting right or left?
Definitely a righty, unfortunately, even though the topic is left-handed. And actually, I think you were pointing out just the other day, Lee, that left-handed people who are baseball fans and play as kids or older actually end up being switch hitters or right-handed hitters because they need to fit in. But we do have a poll of whether or not people think that life is harder for left-handed people. And this was done just a couple of months ago, and asked by CBS News poll. YouGov asked it for CBS News. Only 7% of Americans said that they thought life was a lot harder for left-handed people. 38% thought it was a little harder. Only 5% thought it was easier, and 50% thought that it was not much different at all. And I think we have one lefty among us, right? Just Lee. Jay, you're not a lefty. No, me neither. Do you agree, Lee? Do you find life has been a little bit more challenging?
It requires more adjustment, because I think we are a right-handed world, because there are more right-handed people than left-handed people. So I think that, and I can't prove this, but I would think that left-handed people, as you point out, I am, do more with the right hands than right-handed people do with their left hands, because there's more we got to do. For some reason, scissors only work in the right hand. I don't quite understand why that is, but there's apparently, it looks pretty much like a blade that comes down evenly, but it doesn't seem to work in the left hand. But anyway, so yeah, and I think there is that old notion that, lefties shouldn't be writing. And so therefore kids are taught to learn to write with the right hand. My mother was left-handed with everything, but she wrote with the right hand because in school she was required to write that way.
Well, thankfully, I think that is past.
Yeah, that has passed, and it works equally on computers at this point and laptops.
So 10% of the world's population is estimated to be left-handed. So 7% said it's much harder. So even some lefties in this poll clearly probably did not say that it was much harder. So before we go, I just want a double fun fact on this. I happen to be looking up Spanish words that are not from Latin. Don't ask why. Like naranja, which has a J in it. It's not from Latin. It's actually from Arabic. It means orange in Spanish. And izquierda came up. And izquierda means left in Spanish. So I was like, well, where's that from? Turns out it's from an old Indo-European language. But then I looked into, well, what's the derivation of it? And it means sinister in this old language. And what I didn't realize, because I'm right-handed, is that almost every word for left, including English and in Latin and in almost every language, is a word for something bad, like sinister or devious or mean or cheap. And I didn't realize that. And I guess I was blinded to this idea that left-handed people have been discriminated against in a really bad ways throughout history. I didn't know that. I learned something.
Well, I must say your breadth of knowledge continues to astound us in terms of that brief discussion. I will say also, though, not to force the analogy any further, but a lot of our recent presidents have been left-handed. Take it as you will. I don't know what that means about good and bad and evil and good, but that is probably more to say about left-handedness than the topic warrants. So I'm going to say bye to everybody at this point.
That'll do it for this edition of Poll Hub.
Poll Hub is a production of the Marist Poll at Marist College in Poughkeepsie, New York.
Mary Griffith is our executive producer.
Casey Schaff is our production supervisor.
The Poll Hub team includes Ashley Marcinek, Athen Hollis, and Emily Fry.
If you enjoy Poll Hub, please consider leaving a review.
Positive reviews help other listeners like you find us.
If you'd like to learn more about polling and survey science, check out the Marist Poll Academy, our free online learning portal.
If you have questions for us, tweet them directly to @MaristPoll.
Remember, you can always tell your smart speaker to play Poll Hub, and with any luck, it will cooperate.
Finally, wherever you listen to Poll Hub, there is a subscribe button.
Click it, and the latest episode will be ready for you in your podcasting app as soon as we release it.
We'll see you next time.